that Pastor Christopher Mack, and he goes by C-Mack, so he probably won't turn around if you say Christopher Mack, right?
That's right.
C-Mack it is. And he is the young adults pastor at Trinity Baptist Church, been there for the last 2 years, and he came and spoke with the senior pastor, Dr. Les Holland, last year. And I know that you'll all want to join me, first of all, in thanking Trinity Baptist Church for bringing all the great fried chicken. Some of you recognize our servers up there, Dr. Greg Osborne from our missions trips, and Denise, and all the rest of the team from Trinity Baptist. Thank you all very much. There's a lot of work that goes into getting all that food in here for you guys. So enjoy it. And So please also welcome with me Pastor Christopher Mack. He's going to speak to us today about 10 Talks Over Coffee.
I really love coffee. It's kind of one of the defining things of my life. It is one of the defining things of my time here in San Antonio so far. I have not yet done it yet, but I believe that they just had a coffee place open in the Med Center somewhere around here. Mild Fire, I believe, Coffee Roasters has opened up a place around here. I have not actually checked that out, so I can't tell you where it is. I just know it's in the Med Center. They're one of the few roasters of coffee here in San Antonio that roast locally. I mean, that may not matter a lot to you, but it matters to me, and I think it's really good coffee. So they didn't ask me to say that, but I'll just give them that advertisement. You can find that out there. I don't work there. I don't know anything. No stock, none of that. But really, really enjoy coffee. And kind of for the talk, my talk on TED Talks over coffee, where that sort of was born out of was the coffee shop has kind of become like a second home for me. Is actually local coffee. Again, they're not giving me any money to advertise for them or anything like that. But local coffee, which has several locations around San Antonio, the one that's in the Pearl Brewery area is kind of like my second home away from home. And there I've been at least a few hours every day with my laptop, getting some work done, having some conversations, just some kind of leaning into that as a place of belonging and of some secondary community. And was talking with one of my barista friends there, and at one point his name is Jimmy. Jimmy just kind of said, like, this is a coffee shop. Like, this is a coffee shop. And the reason he was saying that was because we've just got through having this incredibly deep conversation around the things that matter most in life, really sharing from our hearts about all that life entails, and then had immediately flipped over to some pop culture reference, and then we're talking about this latest musical artist and their exploits and that kind of thing, and they've gone back onto sports, just kind of jumping around from the mundane to the meaningful, and he just looked around and like, this is just a coffee shop. I don't know if you've ever found yourself in one of those places, in those moments where you kind of realize that, where it seems all of a sudden that the ground you're on has become holy ground. We see this in the book of Genesis. I'm going to be administering, I'm actually teaching for the first time this semester at a very small university, Baptist University of Americas, here in San Antonio. I'm an Old Testament adjunct instructor. They're going to have their first Old Testament kind of like major exam today. I go there after that to be the destroyer of worlds for them. And been really thinking a lot about the Old Testament since I'm instructing a course on that this semester. We would hope that your instructor thinks a lot about the material as well. And in Genesis, we get to one of these moments too. Jacob is fleeing from his family. He's been conniving and sort of manipulatively stolen the blessing from his brother Esau, right? And he's out in the middle of the wilderness, and all of a sudden, it's like the heavens have opened up, and he sees these angelic heavenly messenger beings going up and down this ladder, and he thinks to himself, like, surely this is the house of the Lord. I didn't even realize it. I didn't even know. He just thought he was camping out on some dirt in the middle of nowhere, and then all of a sudden he realizes this has become for me holy ground. This is a place where things of deep significance happen. And so I want us to think together creatively for the few moments that we have about what it might mean for us to be able to have these kind of TED Talks over TED Talks over coffee with initiating spiritual conversations. I've taken some liberties and at least renamed 2 of the letters of TED Talks. I believe, if I remember correctly, that it's technology, entertainment, and design. If anybody else knows differently, don't make me embarrassed. Keep that to yourself. I think that's what TED Talks normally stands for. I believe that's the abbreviation. But I'm going to let that stand for theology, entertainment, and desire. So I want to talk about the interplay of these 3 things: theology, entertainment, and desire. But before we get to those 3 topics and sort of look at how those might help us in initiating spiritual conversations with one another, I really want to talk about kind of the story behind the story. And that is to say that I think what we're all really trying to do when we're engaging in spiritual conversations, like if we're not that slick businessman type person that's just trying to like sell you, like, here's what you need to believe, here's why I believe this, I know you believe that, but I really studied this, or I read this podcast, and so this is, you need to get on board with what I'm thinking, you need to get on board with what I'm thinking. What we're really searching for is a sense of meaning. And I believe that meaning is mobilized, it becomes mission for our lives, and so that oftentimes if we can look at what is someone's mission, what is it that they have poured their lives into, right? Like, I come into here and I know I've probably got about like, maybe if I'm doing really well, 70% of like the RAM of your brain focused on me, but you're also thinking about like, is this guy gonna like get done in time for me to get to class? And you're thinking about maybe the exam that you have coming up or whatever else that's going on in your day with your personal life, your family, your friends. We all know that there are different things that are the mission of our life, that feel like this is what, in this season of life, I'm dedicating myself to. And I think really good spiritual conversations help us get at that mission, at that meaning of life. There's a poem by Mary Oliver, some of you may have heard this, called The Summer Day. I thought I would just read it because I think it really gets at the sense of the meaning, the mission of our lives. Mary Oliver says this: who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down in the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the field, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I really enjoy that poem by Mary Oliver for a number of reasons. One is because as I'm reading those words, I'm right there with her. I'm seeing the grasshopper. I have a kid like her staying inside most of the time, but I'm like, yeah, I'm right there. That grasshopper is flying away. She just has a way with words of painting a picture and helping you to feel like you're right there. But I also love how she takes something as simple as a grasshopper, just as simple as your every ordinary summer day, and interweaves within it this conversation of what are the really deep things about life. She talks about our mortality. She says she's not really even sure what it looks like to have a prayer life, but she feels like when she's riveted to the present moment and somehow she's connected to something bigger than herself. And then when she's done sharing all of that, Mary Oliver asks you and me to answer this incredibly provocative question. What is it you want to do with your one wild and precious life? Because you're here in this room, we have a bit of a sense of it, because you've got an idea of what you want to do with your one wild and precious life. But I think when it comes to initiating spiritual conversations, that can really be an important segue for us, that people's mission, what motivates them, what they find meaning for, is really giving us a clue to the deepest parts of who they are. Parker Palmer, another person whose works I greatly respect, has said this about the soul. He says, the soul is like a wild animal. It seeks safety in the dense underbrush, especially when other people are around. I love that picture. I may have fibbed a little bit about not being outside that much when I was a kid. And the area that I grew up in, there were tons of deer everywhere. In fact, there was a state park, essentially was my backyard. And I remember as a kid always wanting to know how long, and I would sometimes even when my parents trusted me to go into the park by myself, would just try to sit still for a long time and wonder, like, eventually are the animals going to like not care and just start coming out. And you know, I was probably like 6, so I couldn't stay still that long. So eventually I would leave. Probably if I had, right, like if I would have stayed there all day, if I'd been totally committed, not making a lot of noise, just being totally still, eventually they would have been. But you know, inevitably, if I was trying to sneak up on a deer or some other form of wildlife, I'd snap on that twig and the deer is gone, right? It's just vanished. Well, I think what's so interesting about this analogy that Parker Palmer uses, that our soul is like a wild animal, and that when we come around, it quickly retreats to the underbrush, is that when we're trying to have spiritual conversations, even if someone's at the table with me, right? I'm at local coffee and I've got my espresso and I'm talking with someone, even if they haven't gotten up and actually left the room, what we're really trying to do is connect heart to heart, soul to soul. We're trying to have a conversation about the deepest things that matter in life. And I don't know like what your spiritual conversations with others have been like. I don't know if those were heated. I don't know if they were just kind of very wishy-washy. Well, hey, you believe what you believe, that's great. I believe what I believe, that's great. I don't know what that was like for you, but I know early on when I tried to have spiritual conversations with people, I was really emphatic about needing to be the one who was right in the conversation. And I know that what happened many times because I was so doggedly determined to be sure that I was the one that came out looking like the smartest person in the room, the one who had all the answers, the one who was ultimately right, was that though that person may have been gracious enough to stay at the table with me for the entire conversation, spiritually, their soul had retreated like a deer long, long ago. Have you ever been in any of those conversations? Or, you know, maybe that's happening with us right now, actually. That's right. But spiritually, our souls can retreat if they don't feel like it's a safe environment. And so I think part of what it means for us to try to have spiritual conversations is to be aware that we're not just trying to exchange ideas. We're not going to battle because we're trying to get someone to buy that our propositions are better than their propositions. That ultimately what we're really hoping for is that souls can connect to soul, that meaning can be found, and that in the Christian context, Jesus Christ's truth can bring transformation that leads not only to life change now, but for an eternity. But that's like really deep stuff, right? Like you guys are mostly in some form of medical field kind of thing, and so you know that you are now or will in the future be invited to like some of the most deep, intimate moments of people's lives. As a pastor, I have sort of some of the same privilege. I remember right before I came to San Antonio, I was at Baylor University then as a university chaplain, and the student that was running a half marathon had just collapsed just a few yards away from the finish line. This was literally on a Saturday when I'm packing up my stuff from my office to move to San Antonio. And so I was the nearest chaplain on campus, and so I get there. They've already taken him to the hospital, and I rush over to the hospital. Don't know really what the student's status is. His best friends have all shown up, and they're very concerned. And sure enough, the attending physician comes up and says to them, I would like to talk to you guys, in this room. And you all would know, I think, or will know, that if they're saying, hey, come into like this room, that small room with the Kleenexes and like no pictures, it's like a really scary, intimidating, almost like cell kind of thing, that the news is not going to be good, right? I mean, you know that. You don't go in there to say, it's a boy and it's healthy and everything went great and, and we've decided not to even charge you, just, have a great day. You don't go into that room to get that news. And so I'm aware of this, and it's clear to me that like none of his friends are aware of this, right? And so you know, they're saying, okay, we'll go into the room, and they go into the room, and sure enough, unfortunately, the worst that's happened, the student has passed away, you know, right there. And the students were just devastated, you know, they're just down for the count. They had been excited, they were there to cheer on their friend to finish his first half marathon, and never expected that they would be getting that kind of news in that way. And that was delivered by someone that may be one of you someday in the future, very likely. And so we know that when we have these spiritual conversations, we're being invited into the deepest, most intimate places of people's lives. And so I think that the presence of Christ that we bring into those moments significantly matters. We need to be aware that their soul is like that wild animal. And so when we engage people on that level, we have to do everything we can. Yes, still to be rooted to truth, not to be uncompromising, to be this wishy-washy sort of person, but also to be able to do that in a spirit of peaceful centeredness and compassion, and I would say deep listening. One of the ways I think that we can create that environment is by really listening to people. You've probably had that experience when you're talking with someone and you're already trying to think through, like as you're kind of listening to their thoughts about what you said, sort of the next thing that you're going to say or your rebuttal to what they're going to say, because you know that ultimately you're trying to steer the conversation into a particular direction to get to a particular place. Deep listening is just fully present and open and available. Deep listening is trying to hear the story behind the story that's being shared. It is trying to help people hear their own hearts, because so many times when we're in conversations, we're sharing and we're not even realizing that, but we're saying this is the problem, but really it's this over here. And deep listening allows us to be present to people in conversations in a way that helps us to point that out. I often will do this both in my friendships and in my ministry, when someone will come and talk to me and they're sharing and they're really convinced that they're upset at their spouse for this, or their children for this, or their significant other for that. And as I listen to them and try to be open, I'm thinking, you're saying the problem is this, but you're bringing a lot of emotion for a problem that feels like it's about this big. You're bringing about this much emotion. Can you tell me a little bit about why you think this has disturbed you so significantly? You know, and initially, well, because they just don't get it, they don't respect me, they don't care, we've agreed that we're going to do all this. It sounds like you feel really underappreciated, really misunderstood. You want to talk about that. And the more that they talk, the more that through deep listening you begin to hear, and as you see, even as I then move it to the next thing of asking life-giving questions in conversations. I think through deep listening and asking life-giving questions, questions that don't have an agenda, questions that are honest, that you really may not know the answer to, you're just saying, hey, this is what I'm noticing, this is what I'm seeing, tell me more about this. Again, connect us to meaning, to value, to the deepest place of our hearts. Allow our soul to feel like, oh, finally, for the first time, I'm uncovering what's deep down inside of me and able to share that with other people. I think this allows us to begin to have these spiritual conversations on a much deeper level. The thing that I also want us to be aware of are the interplay of relationships and stories in people's lives. I think particularly for your generation, and I think I'm technically allowed just by like 1 or 2 years to be a part of your generation, so I'll say our generation, so you may have a hard time buying that. For our generation, relationships and stories matter significantly. And so though I think we often might want to start having a spiritual conversation, well, tell me, isn't it true that your faith believes God is this way, but we know that God is that way? Or isn't it true that you see reality this way, we see reality that way? Those are important conversations and very worthy of being had. But I think we often miss that what's connected to those beliefs, to those theological statements, to those doctrines, are a deep sense of meaning and their relationships. There are people who have nurtured them in that faith and in that context. And so when you're going against something, you're not just pressing against this sort of abstract propositional idea. You're pressing up against, well, this is what everyone in my culture or everyone in my family, this is what my grandparents passed on to my parents, who passed this on to me. This is the great moments we would have in our religious festivals or in our lack of religious festivals. And so when we press up against those things, it's important to not only get to know the ideas of the people that we're talking to, but to know the relationships and stories that are connected to those ideas. Because a lot of times, even the person themselves may not realize that what's really so disconcerting for them isn't so much that they're having a hard time believing the idea that we're talking about, but that it's to give up that idea would seem to betray that whole other context of relationships and stories that have gone along in their life. And so I think it's important that we really look at those relationships and stories. And so now, to get to the TBD of our talk, and then send you guys out of here. So we have theology is the first T. And again, when we think about theology, who or what makes meaning in your life? Another question I like to ask people often when I'm in the coffee shop, and it amazes me. You would think if you had this like Christian pastor in this, like, I guess not any kind of religious coffee shop, but just a secular coffee shop that, people are, the guy's going to try to corner you and talk about Jesus. But instead, both baristas and patrons, for the most part, seem to like actually coming alongside and sharing sort of what's going on in their life. And let's have a really vigorous conversation around these things. And one of the first conversations I often like to, or questions I like to ask people is just, what gives you hope in your life or in your world? Tell me a little bit about that, whatever it is. And, it often kind of catches them off guard. We don't usually think about, what's the thing in my life that gives me hope? If they have small children, they might start to tell me the stories about, well, I'm really hopeful that this person is going to grow up to be this kind of person in the world. Or they might tell me about the person who they think they're falling in love with or have fallen in love with, and how they have a great hope for their life about that. But this idea of what gives you hope is also connecting you to that sense of what are those important stories and relationships, but then also to that idea of mission that I talked about, mobilizing meaning in their life. And then when we ask those kinds of questions, what gives you purpose? What gives you hope? We're able to get a deep insight into that person's life. And I find often if I've done a really good job of listening to someone and really listening to them, really getting to know a bit of their story in their life, that they're more than willing to return the question to me. They're more than willing. Okay, so now what is it that gives you hope? What is it that gives your life purpose? And then, because I've spent the last 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes listening to them talk about what motivates their lives, I've now gotten a place at the table, quite literally, to be able to share how the gospel of Jesus Christ gives hope and purpose to my life in the world. I think another question that we need to think through, particularly if we're talking to people that are a part of our generation, are what are the biggest problems the world is facing? And we could throw a lot of those out, right? We could talk about terrorism, or we could talk about environmental catastrophes that may or may not be just around the corner. We could talk about financial tensions, about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Is there going to be a middle class in the future? We can talk about all sorts of things that might be stressors in our life. But something that I found to be true is we need to be ready to have an understanding of how our Christian faith seeks to be a part of the solution to those answers. That if we're essentially engaging people on a level that's just saying, hey, I know you're not even sure there is an afterlife, and I know you're probably not even that convinced that you are sinful, but you really need to listen to me because you are sinful and there is an afterlife and this may not go well for you in about 60 years, that's not really going to connect with them. Okay, so at best what you're telling me is I need to believe like you believe so that 60, 70 years from now, things will be better. And I believe that is true, that the gospel is much more robust than that, right? Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is near, it's in our midst. He teaches us to pray that His will, our Father's will, be done on earth as it is in heaven. He seems to have this understanding that the pressing problems of the world today really do have answers that the gospel wants to seek to address. And I think we need to be prepared to have thought through, well, what do I see as the Christian answer, the Christian hope to some of the biggest problems our world is facing today? And the idea of entertainment, what are the stories, what are the messages, what are the groups, what are the sports that move you? I find most commonly when I'm talking to people about their favorite artists, their favorite movies, their favorite TV shows, right? Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, whatever it may be, that you're able to then engage around, and what is the deeper meaning? What is it that makes millions of people block out their Sunday night and say, we're not going to DVR this, we're going to make sure we see Mad Men when we come home? What is it about that show that moves people? And again, I think you're getting a quick avenue to be able to talk about the deepest things of life and purpose and value. And the final thing I wanted to share is desire. What are you passionate about? What do you find yourself longing for? I think when we answer that question, when we listen to other people talk about this gives us an avenue to begin to have important spiritual soul-to-soul conversations where we can be those deep listeners, ask life-giving questions, and then be prepared to also share at the table about how our faith in Christ gives us hope and purpose and significance and meaning in this life and in the life to come. I think as we think about these conversations, we also have to be willing to know that we are going to be shaped in the process of these conversations too, right? Like there's not this sense that since I have all the answers and I'm really just kind of seeing you as a project, I know that ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to be just like me. That in order for these spiritual conversations to really happen in a deep, meaningful way, we're going to have to be open to learning from the people we're in conversation with, to seeing the insights they have. They may not have truth in what we see to be an absolute or ultimate way, but they still have the ability to perceive and understand truth in their unique context. And we need to be willing to be shaped by that and learn from that as well, too. And so I think those are my thoughts for us today about what it means to have TED Talks around theology, entertainment, and desire that really allow us to get into spiritual conversations with the people that matter most in our life. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you and for all that you have going on in your life, that God has brought you here in this season of life. Know that you've got a ton going on, and if there's any way that we can ever give blessing to you at Trinity, you know that we would love to do that. Lots of great churches here in San Antonio. But the thing I wanted to let you know about is that we're hosting an apologetics conference. And so if you're thinking, yeah, this was a great kind of whet my appetite sort of thing. I was trying to squeeze about an hour's content into 25, 30 minutes. And I'd like to learn a lot more. Next weekend, February, I believe that's 27th and 28th, we will be hosting at Trinity Baptist Church an apologetics conference. We would love to have you there. Feel free to check that out if you have the time. And I think with that, we done. Do we head back to you, Scott, or we?
Why don't you pray for them and we'll close it out.
All right. Lord Jesus, we thank you that you desire to meet us. You desire to connect with us, and that you want to connect our faith to the faiths of others. You want us to be able to meet people soul to soul so that your power can bring hope and life transformation and ultimately lead people into your way, your truth, your life. And so help us to do that. We know it can be intimidating, it can be challenging. We don't want to come off as pushy salesmen. We don't want to alienate people. We may not feel like we're very confident in knowing all that it is that we have to say. Help us to trust that if we just show up, if we listen, if we ask life-giving questions, that you're going to meet us in a powerful way and meet them. And that we might be saying over coffee with some friends in the near future that this is a coffee shop. And being amazed at all that you're doing from our simple obedience and willingness to show up and trust you. In Jesus' name we pray.